Amitabh Mittal, who is part of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, in detail talking about what they did, exactly the tactics that they used, the measures that they went to make sure that this resolution that would make life easier for Muslims in India and make them and give them a part of society, give them Indian citizenship, is something that did not happen. In 2021, the Chicago City Council voted down a resolution that criticized India's Citizenship Amendment Act, a controversial law that denies citizenship to Muslim refugees from neighboring countries. The resolution, titled Resolution Condemning India's Citizenship Amendment Act, was opposed by some council members who argued that it was based on misinformation and interference in India's internal affairs. The defeat of the resolution was viewed as a result of the democratic process and the diverse perspectives in the city. But was it so? 2 years later, the role of the US-based Hindu nationalist groups in a dishonest campaign to subvert the city council's democratic process has been exposed. The groups used deceptive tactics such as creating misleading identities, sending mass emails, and spreading misinformation to influence the council members. In a Facebook video broadcast to their inner circle, Illinois-based Hindutva ideologue Bharat Barai and General Secretary of Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, Amitabh Mittal, have revealed a web of sensational details about their underhanded tactics. From hired lobbyists to the misuse of the office of the Indian Consul General and a covert IT cell sending automated emails to the city aldermen, the scale of deception is breathtaking.
I also have to give credit here to the Consul General. Initially, he was very inactive, but then he became active and he did make personal phone calls to practically almost all the aldermen. And his position does carry some weight. And I'm sure all the other efforts added to it.
This is not a one letter you get 4,000 copies of. We had 17 different versions of these. So you're not feeling like that, oh, it's just a copy and paste job. So it will randomize every time you one click. It will send a different letter with your name, with your address, and it will change the paragraphs around. So there were 17 different versions of these letters that went out.
Chicago Alderwoman Maria Hayden, who fearlessly presented the resolution, found herself the subject of personal attacks and false accusations. On March 22nd, 2021, Mittal staged a rally outside of Hayden's office in Rogers Park.
Demonstrated in front of Maria Hayden's office. They brought some of the Christian volunteers. Amitabh, you can talk more about it since I was not there, but you were there. The role of Vijay Prabhakar and Christian community in the demonstration in front of Maria Hayden's office.
That was just a quick plan. Within 24 hours, we decided we want to go and demonstrate inside her office, even though she doesn't come there on Monday.
In this unseen video, Barai and Mittal disclose intense lobbying efforts to pressure the aldermen to vote against the resolution. They formed the US-India Friendship Council, using a deceptively neutral name to influence the resolution while hiding their Hindu nationalist agenda.
So what we did in Chicago, we have started a 501c called US-India Friendship Council. Remember, if you want to approach the aldermen and other people, or even congressmen or senators, if you can go as Hindus, it will have one type of impact. But if you want to go as a, look, your goal is same, okay? Goal is no different. You are just using a different vehicle to try to achieve it, because religious organizations many times don't get as much of attention as neutral sounding or US-India Friendship League, because whatever you want to oppose, you can do it in name of, oh, this will affect the friendship between the two countries. You realize how we can use it. So we thought that that will be a smart way. You want to contact the congressman. Nobody is going to oppose and say that, oh, you are trying to promote friendship between the two countries. Hindus, they might say you are butchers. This, you might say this, but they are not good. So the entire campaign in newspapers and everything was under the banner of US-India Friendship League. Now, we are the guys who control it, okay? But we don't put the Hindu name there. We want to do it as Hindu, then we do it with another organization. So you can have multiple organizations doing the same thing, but emphasizing from different angle. I would say if you do a multi-prong attack, just don't do it under the Hindu names. Look, you can control the same organization. Me and Amitabh are with the US-India Friendship Council too. So you can be a member of VHPA and you can be a member of US-India Friendship Council. You control both organizations. So you can send one letter in their Hindu name and send one letter in name of Friendship League.
They also hired lobbyist Joe Moore, a former Chicago alderman, to garner support against the resolution.
Amitabh was able to engage the services of Mr. Joe Moore. So he was not a lobbyist for Narendra Modi or Indian government. I just want to tell you, we, the friends, pitched in the money from our pocket. He is a former alderman, but he was alderman for almost 20 plus years. So he knew everybody. And I have to tell you, retrospectively looking now, this was invaluable piece. To piece together 26 aldermen who will vote against it was a virtually impossible task 2 weeks ago. But Joe Moore played very important role because many aldermen, if they don't know you or if you don't know them, they are not going to give you an appointment.
They seemingly collaborated with a prominent anti-Muslim organization called Middle East Forum to falsely portray the resolution as the work of radical Islamist groups. A vicious, abusive, hate-filled social media campaign was launched by Hindutva forces and the Middle East Forum, both working in tandem. A top functionary of the Middle East Forum named Benjamin Baird ran a campaign urging Chicago voters to tell the Chicago City Council to vote against the resolution. Baird and his colleagues sent more than 12,000 letters to city aldermen warning them that the Islamic extremists were behind the bill. Several Twitter handles like Chicago Hindu Community and Reject Anti-India Hate were created to wage the propaganda war and target Hayden personally. The then Consul General of India in Chicago, Amit Kumar, joined the Hindutva forces, adding another layer of unethical involvement.
I also have to give credit here to the Consul General. Initially, he was very inactive, but then he became active and he did make personal phone calls to practically almost all the aldermen. And his position does carry some weight. And I'm sure all the other efforts added to it.
A covert IT cell was created to target Hayden and others who were supporting the resolution.
Social media, Twitter storm and putting it on the Facebook. So these guys are savvy, I'm not. That's why we have to credit, and we have to get our younger generation that is computer savvy, social media savvy to rein in. We design for them, we give them, idea, and then let it be implemented.
But I revealed that right-wing bloggers were pressed into service to create a deceptive narrative on social media.
Yes, our volunteers made quite a bit, and we also sought help from other people in the Hindu community who are good writers, like Satya Dasapati, Arvind Kumar, Suhag Shukla, and Sunanda Vashist. They wrote some blogs.
They also devised an automated system that used mass WhatsApp messages to send emails to the council members. By clicking on a link in a WhatsApp message, each of the 50 aldermen would receive different emails that appeared to be personalized. This way, Barai and his team were able to flood every alderman's inbox with thousands of emails that opposed the resolution.
Let me share with you now the modus operandi without taking the name. So it took us 8 to 9 hours to very carefully craft the message. Some of you got it on WhatsApp. But once it was done, at the bottom was one click. So with one click, message went out to 5 individuals or 5 groups. But many of them were groups, so it went to maybe 10 people, 20 people, 30 people. So in last 4 days, we were able to send out message to hundreds of people with a request that you share it with other people. And with that one click, all 50 aldermen will receive the email under their name. That was, so believe it or not, each alderman received between 5,000 to 7,000 emails, each alderman. And that was because of this automation process that we were able to automate our letter writing. One individual, tick, 50 aldermen get the letter. And believe me, it was very easy for people to do. They read, oh, Brai has said this, read, boom, tick, and 50 aldermen get the email. So that's how we were able to get between 5,000 to 7,000. And on the floor of City Council, they did acknowledge that they read thousands of emails, most of them against it. So this is where we swamped them.
Barai and his team now commemorate the resolution's defeat as India Unity Day, masking their divisive agenda. It is crucial to acknowledge and confront the fascist agenda of Hindutva forces in the US before irreparable damage is done. The time to act is now. So as all of you could see from that video, they were speaking about this so openly. They were talking about all of the strategies that they took. This was on a Facebook Live. So it wasn't, something that was privatized and somebody found it. It was all out there. Todd, I want to invite you in to talk about, what you saw in the video and your thoughts on these drastic measures that these Hindutva forces have taken right here in the United States. They are trying to impact what is happening in India by protesting here in the United States. So we would love to hear from you. And this is Todd Green from Interfaith America.
Well, thanks for having me and for the invitation for this and for being able to weigh in. And I'll keep my remarks pretty brief. I think my colleagues will have a lot better insights and some expertise on this that I don't bring. But I could say a few things when I watch a video like that. One, the connection with the Islamophobia industry, particularly in this case, the collaboration with the Middle East Forum, a really ardent anti-Muslim organization here in the United States, which actually wasn't all that surprising to me because I have seen some other instances in which there's a bit of a convergence in the United States of some Hindutva-inspired organizations or individuals and the Islamophobia industry, and seeing the latter sort of tack in the direction of more and more investing themselves in Indian politics and the Hindu nationalist narrative of Islam and Muslims as some sort of existential threat. There's political opportunity for folks doing this, for the likes of a Daniel Pipes or Robert Spencer. There's also financial gain for this too, particularly because this is a really wide open market for them in a time politically, at least here in the United States, where they don't quite have the platform they would have had 4 or 5 years ago to center Islamophobia as its major political issue. That might change, of course, in the next couple of years, but for now, they've shifted their energy elsewhere. And so something like this that happens in Chicago, we start to see this intertwining of these two. And that's something I think we have to pay a lot more attention to and start tracking the connections between these two. I also think that might help in endeavors, particularly when progressive politicians are being targeted with some of these campaigns and initiatives like they were in Chicago, when you make these more overt connections to the Islamophobia industry, that could be helpful in terms of undermining those messages and those strategies. The only other two things I want to say, number one is Illinois. I think this was in Chicago. Illinois is becoming really a hotbed for this sort of activity. You think of states like California, Texas, New Jersey, but Illinois, these strategies have been effective. They were effective in this case. And at least initially last year in 2022, the first go around when the Indian American Advisory Council Act went up in the state legislature and was passed, Indian was defined over against anyone descending or having connections with Muslim majority countries such as Pakistan or Bangladesh. So someone is Indian if they hail from India or from Nepal, as an example, but not from Pakistan. And that was very problematic. And then there was a pushback against that later, but it passed muster the first time around. And we need to ask ourselves why that is. And some of these similar strategies are there, right? So Illinois is a place to focus on in this instance. And the final thing I want to say, just this is some experience last year when I was focusing a lot more on this work and engaging the federal government on it, is my sense that while you have to read between the lines a little bit with this video and this campaign in Chicago, what I think is starting to happen and what we have to pay attention to is the different racial dynamics of Hindutva-inspired Islamophobia that really poses problems, morally speaking, at least in their consciousness, for progressive politicians in the United States or activists who want to be sensitive for racism and sensitive to other forms of racial religious bigotry, don't want to be called Hinduphobes, don't want to be called racist. And so they're a little bit more easily persuaded when there is a concerted effort like this to overturn a resolution like we saw in Chicago. I think this is a little bit different than when you are challenging a Daniel Pipes or a Robert Spencer or a Pamela Geller. The racial dynamics are different. But people who look like me, have my racial, religious, cultural background, when we are being pushed on this, and there are Hindutva connected organizations or individuals doing this, it paralyzes many of us. We don't want to be on the wrong side of this. We don't want to. We're fighting against racism, but if the implication is we might be racist by supporting such a resolution. There are people like me who oftentimes will be pulling back on this in a way that they wouldn't if the more overt tie to this campaign was with the Islamophobia industry in the mainstream sense. So that's something I think has made it particularly complicated in Chicago as an illustration of that, to push back against this form of Islamophobia, because the racial dynamics have really overturned the assumed playbook amongst other progressive activists in the United States and politicians when it comes to identifying Islamophobia and where it is and how they counter it. They don't really know what to do here, and they get confused very easily, and they don't know the ins and outs of Indian politics or politics in diaspora. So they're very easily persuaded to do something that otherwise, if they really dug in and focused on what was going on here, they would have come to a different decision.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's interesting that you mentioned the Indian American Advisory Council, because the Ram Bilavalam and Teresa Ma, who are two great friends of the Muslim community, signed on to that. And and this is one of those times where Hindutva was the Hindutva agenda was very discreet. They didn't even catch it. They, of course, apologized. They said, you know what we stand for, the kind of people that we are. We would never sign on to something like this. And, like how the Hindutva forces had success overturning this resolution about the CAA, we were able to work and overturn the Indian American Advisory Council, and we turned it into the South Asian American Advisory Council. We had a celebration for it. Like I said, Dick Durbin was there, Teresa Ma was there, Ram Bilavalam was there. And we were also able to get like a big population of the Nepali community as well, because they were excluded originally from that. So, the work is being done on both sides. We're obviously fighting for equality. We're fighting for justice. We're fighting to make sure that all South Asians are included, and also all Muslims are counted in India. In fact, my family is from Gujarat, India, where the Gujarat programs happened in 2002. So to see all of this happen so discreetly and blatantly, they have a playbook, and they're working in a very certain and calculated way in order to make this happen. And so we've seen it multiple times in Illinois, and I'm sure we will continue to see it across the country. But thank you so much for offering your expertise and that very valuable information, Todd. We really appreciate your time today.
You bet. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we will be hearing from Robert McCall, who is the Director of Government Affairs at CARE. Robert, as you saw in the video, there was mention about using the Indian Consul General for benefit, and then also tying in groups like CARE and ICNA to Islamophobia. And I think those things are right up your alley. So, we would love to hear what you have to say, especially after seeing the video and seeing the way that the narrative was shifted into making CARE and ICNA and IAMC radical Islamic organizations.
Yeah, I thank you, number one, for having me. Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace. I'm definitely going to touch upon that. I have some prepared remarks. I'm going to jump onto that in the end, if you don't mind. So I really do think, having worked in the space for several years now, it's important to connect this rise of anti-Muslim acts of communal intimidation, whether, what we recently just saw in Chicago or in New Jersey and beyond, to this troubling ideology of Hindutva, also known as Hindu nationalism, which was founded in India, but has really taken root not only in the US, but globally. So it's really crucial to understand this broader context of how Hindutva-linked organizations, especially the Hindu American Foundation or Hindu PAC, are actively working to minimize pushback against legitimate criticism, often labeling critique of India or its leaders as Hinduphobia. More often, we see some Hindutva groups and leaders, as you said, they are promoting older, previously used, harmful, debunked anti-Muslim conspiracy theories to achieve their political goals. And I'll get more to that in a minute. For the past several years, we've witnessed these US-based organizations and activists with ties to Hindutva working to minimize criticism and dilute efforts to combat these Islamophobic or even anti-Dalit acts of intimidation or trends of discrimination, as we've seen in Chicago, but also in places like New Jersey and Seattle. These Hindutva-linked organizations have worked to dissuade resolutions criticizing Hindutva and its negative externalities. We've also recently seen in places like California, in their state legislature, attempts to undermine legislation that would address caste discrimination. And again, they use these tired out tropes of Muslims with overseas connections are really the ones pushing these anti-discrimination bills in the California legislature, as if it was some plot. So CARE, yourself with IAMC, groups like Hindus for Human Rights, other massa groups, we've been vigilant to US-based Hindutva groups' efforts to actively minimize Islamophobia. And we've been in the same room. I think you know this. When we meet with federal law enforcement agencies, as we raise these concerns about anti-Muslim billboards, caste discrimination, online harassment of academics, journalists, politicians, and the likes. And furthermore, CARE and IMC have persistently called on Congress not to buy into Hindutva group efforts to push the US government to overlook Indian Prime Minister Modi's support for national policies that discriminate against Muslims, or in the case of Hindu PAC, their active lobbying against the Combating and Monitoring International Islamophobia Act, which would create a special envoy in the State Department to monitor Islamophobia overseas, because that would have a direct connection to the US government having to take a stronger position of the Islamophobia we see taking place in India and their state policies of discrimination against Muslims. So, as we saw in this video, you have anti-Muslim groups like the Middle Eastern Forum. And what you didn't see in the video is other actors like Robert Spencer with Jihad Watch. They have put out these original conspiracy theories that try to link CARE, IAMC, ICNA, most recently a group in Canada to overseas Muslim groups, or to try to link them to terrorist groups even, or political movements, to besmirch our message of us calling out, Islamophobia coming from Hindutva-based groups or leaders. And while for the past 20 years, we successfully worked to marginalize these fringe conspiracy theories, Hindutva groups are now reviving and disseminating these, and they're giving a lifeline to what was the severely diminished U.S. Islamophobia network. So I think it's really paramount that we confront Hindutva-inspired Islamophobia. We actively counter these efforts and organizations, and that we push back, and that we challenge these very harmful conspiracy theories that, again, were once pushed to the margins. When we talk about the Indian American community, Hindutva leaders, not the entire Indian American community, engaging the consul's office from India to get involved in local politics. This is something that we've seen in Chicago, we've seen in New Jersey. It's part of their playbook, so it's not surprising. This actually happens quite often when Palestinian human rights groups will criticize Israel for acts of humanitarian violations, and we'll see local consul offices from Israel do the same playbook of creating this astroturf localized pushback on these issues. But this isn't just a matter of words and ideology. It's about upholding the values of respect, diversity, and justice that we as a nation hold dear. So we need to continue to work together to expose this and to push back. So I hope that's helpful, but thank you so much for having me here.
No, thank you so much, Robert, for joining us and for offering that insight. And like we know, in order to push a particular agenda, you have to vilify vilifying another group of people is how you can better push a particular agenda. So we really appreciate you joining us today and offering your insight. Thank you, Robert. Next, we will have a video message from Sunita Vishwanath, who is the Executive Director of Hindus for Human Rights. She was supposed to join us live, but if any of you know her, she's always fighting. She's always out somewhere. So she got tied up with something else this morning, but she was kind enough to send us a video message. So we will hear from her now.
Namaste to all of my community gathered here. Today, as we gather in this expansive digital realm, a space full of both promise and threat, my heart is imbued with a mixture of sadness and determination. The unfolding of the most recent events in India, namely the raids and arrests of brave and respected journalists, many of them are friends, and now this expose on certain Hindutva forces in America and their well-orchestrated strategy to compromise fair and democratic processes right here in this country indeed casts a shadow. This is not a revelation for many of us who have been witnessing the covert and overt manipulations over the past decade and longer. The treachery and viciousness of the Hindu right is hardly a surprise to us. I choose to focus my remarks today by speaking as a Hindu to Hindus. My primary concern isn't merely about those orchestrating these shameful and unscrupulous maneuvers. It's about us, the broader Hindu community, and our predisposition to be swayed by such distortions. I am so saddened that my community is taken in by this trickery and falls into these traps. We are willfully blind to the atrocities taking place all around us. Atrocities taking place in our name as Hindus. First and foremost, we urgently need to open our eyes and hearts to rediscover the virtue of thinking critically. As the world around us becomes increasingly convoluted, our ability to discern truth from falsehood becomes paramount. This isn't just about countering falsehood, it's about preserving the integrity of our beliefs and our community. The narratives peddled to us would have us believe we are oppressed victims, whereas in reality, we are part of a community that holds substantial power, both in numbers and influence. We should own this power and use it for the good. We belong to a tradition celebrated for its wisdom, knowledge, and spiritual depth. So I ask, when did we start mistaking the shadows for the substance? Our Hindu faith and gloriously diverse traditions, rooted in such a rich variety of scripture, story, and teachings, is not a static doctrine, but a dynamic guide for life. It's a beacon that illuminates our path in the darkest of times. Our Bhakti saints, for instance, they weren't just spiritual leaders, they were societal reformers. They were social justice warriors. They taught us to embrace diversity, to challenge bigotry, to instill kindness in our young ones, and to stand alongside those that are the most marginalized, the most oppressed. Embodying these values is not a deviation or an addition to Hinduism. It is the very essence of it. It's part of its lived experience, its heritage, our heritage. It's the practice of doing Hinduism, making it an active, vibrant, and compassionate force in our everyday lives. It's our sadhana. I reflect on a saying from my family. If our gold is bad, how can we blame the jeweler for the bad jewel? This isn't just a call for introspection, but a reminder that the foundation of any belief, any community, lies within its members. Our strength, our values, and our direction are determined by what we cultivate within. While the Hindu right has honed the art of manipulation, of lies, the responsibility rests with us to think for ourselves and act righteously. The wisdom from our texts, like the Rig Veda, beckons us. Let noble thoughts come from all directions. The Bhagavad Gita speaks of authenticity. Better to follow one's own dharma imperfectly than another's dharma perfectly. In essence, think and act for yourself. While we may be imperfect Hindus and imperfect humans, let us all strive to be compassionate ones, active ones, alert ones, who think for ourselves and live the values that truly represent our shared humanity. Let's journey on this path together, united in our commitment to cherish and live these ideals in our daily lives, all of us. The first step is to wake up and smell the coffee. Thank you, and Jai Sierra.
We want to thank Sunita for taking out the time to record that message. She and I have had many conversations, and she talks about how unfortunate it is that she, as a practicing Hindu, it has to differentiate. You know, that she is one of those people who's at the forefront, who has to differentiate Hindutva extremism ideology from Hinduism as a religion. And I think myself as a Muslim, when I was a lot younger, when I was in high school and college, whenever, you know, Islamic extremist groups would attack somewhere, I felt the pressure to separate myself as a Muslim and Islamic extremism, which does not represent anything that actual Islam represents. So we thank Sunita. We know she couldn't be here, but we thank her for taking out the time. And now I want to toss it over to Hatem Bazian. He is a lecturer at UC Berkeley. I mean, a very decorated academician, but right now I believe you are at UC Berkeley. And, you know, like we said, you've heard the rest of our panelists speak. We've watched the video, and we, you know, would like to hear your thoughts on this entire issue.
So good morning, we're in the West Coast, but good afternoon for you on the East Coast. Thank you, Hasna, for the invitation. And really thanks for the Indian American Muslim Council for their continued work on exposing Hindutva and continue to do the important work on Capitol Hill on this front. I have a number of comments to speak about, both with seeing the video and the content in relation to the Chicago City Council resolution on the Citizenship Amendment Act and on the National Registry of Citizenship, two important pieces that weaken the democratic infrastructure in India, and rightly so. Resolutions across the country in the US, and I was familiar with the resolution here in San Francisco that was put forth on this. What this brings us is that, especially Dr. Bharat Paraya from the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, and all the people that work with, there are a number of issues that comes out from the video. One, the defeat of the resolution was by means of utilizing structured Islamophobia. we're living in an Islamophobic social imaginary, where anytime that you want to really shift the discussions and debate from a human rights centered discussion into demonization and basically avoid addressing the serious problems of democracy in India with the Hindutva, Islamophobia is thrown into the mix. And I think this was very clear from the video and all of the communication in there. How Islamophobia was utilized by using the framing of terrorism, both referencing Muslim organizations and using demonization tactics of throwing on them terrorism, which is a very well tried and tested strategy that has been around for quite some time. Almost every Muslim organization in the United States, and I don't like to refer to Muslim organizations by name when I'm speaking about terrorism, because that gets to be almost reaffirming the narrative. So almost every Muslim organization on the national stage has been demonized through the use of the framing of terrorism. So we very clearly see that the strategy in defeating the resolution utilized this and shifting the discussion. Third comment is that we see the deliberate development of a coalition that brought together the Hindutva activists in the United States, using a front organization, the US-India Friendship Council, which is a front organization to shield or to obfuscate the Hindutva organizations that are there. But also we see when Mr. Pariah said that they called a demonstration in front of the Alderman Hayden's office, and the Christian groups were rallied immediately in a 24-hour. That gets us that dimension of Christian evangelicals, right-wing Christians, which we see even in other cases in California relative to the curriculum and so on, that this is involvement. And then the third component of this coalition is the Middle East Forum, Benjamin Byrd, as well as others within the Middle East Forum, led by Daniel Pipes, the granddaddy of the Islamophobia industry, both in the United States and transnationally. So we see this is very critical and important to point that this convergence of relations and coalitions coming into the forefront. And I think the Middle East Forum has to be and constantly exposed for their engagement in Islamophobia and now their partnership in there. The fourth element that I wanted to also comment is the astroturfing, which Robert spoke about, but it's more actually using the social media, using the platforms. We saw that they created almost a unit with 7 individuals that were operating as a team to create this 7,000, say 5,000 to 7,000 emails being sent with 17 different types of messages. And we need to speak about the artificial intelligence that is being used, the new modes of communications that creates the perception of massive involvement, even though that it is actually a small team. And that reminds me that this type of strategy of astroturfing political work was utilized first in Cambridge Analytica, in Brexit, in the UK. We know the expose of it. Then it was also brought during the Trump campaign using Facebook data and creating that material. What the question for us that actually needs to be posed is the critical role of social media allowing anti-Muslim Islamophobic content to be unchecked and having a free hand without any type of intervention. While we know in some cases where Muslims are actually attempted to engage in civil society, it's very immediately that your posts are removed and your engagement is censored. So we have an issue, we have a task to undertake, really both possibly we engage with the City Council of Chicago and others. What is the role of the social media platforms that right now easily can be utilized as an instrument against human rights whether it's in India or other places. So that's a very important. The fifth item that also I wanted to comment, which was also brought together, is the role of the foreign government in here. As Dr. Bharat said, that the India Council General was very instrumental, and he called every alderman lobbying and engaging with them. And that I think we need to raise the critical question in here, that it looks outwardly as an intelligence operations with the Indian government and its representative involved. And therefore, we need to pose the question, are they acting as agents of a foreign government in the United States, interfering in the political process? And I would say, and maybe some would consult legal experts in this, is to actually file a complaint against the VGHP of America, as well as the US-India Friendship Council, and whether they were actually acting as unregistered agents of a foreign government, interfering in the democratic process in America, and how we actually need to. For me, outwardly, it looked like an intelligence operations with all participants and resources, including a 501c3 organization engaging substantially in lobbying and engaging in substantial work that is not part of their mandate as a 501c3. So these are issues that we need to really point the finger. Lastly, I would say increasingly, Hindutva activists in India are the overwhelming producers of Islamophobic content coming out on social media and various platforms. And most likely this will be an ace that we need to examine, considering the convergence of the forces that are acting and demonizing Muslims in America, and I would say by extension also in Canada and Europe. So this is a very important piece, and I think there has to be follow-up discussions, debate, as well as research on this important case. But thank you for sharing the material and bringing us into this conversation.
Thank you so much, Hatem, for joining us. Excellent remarks, very insightful. And like you said, there are bloggers and social media personalities in India who are, stirring up hatred here as well. And that makes our job a little more difficult. We have to go a little harder. We have to make sure that our awareness and our research is presented in a digestible way for an audience, because there are so many Americans, especially, like you said, Christian groups and Jewish groups, who bound together with the Hindutva groups in Chicago. They don't know better. Some of them don't know better. Some of them don't know the reality of what's going on the other side of the world. So it's very important that we also push across our knowledge. And of course, programs like this is one way to do it. We have experts all on one panel who are very knowledgeable on these topics. So thank you once again for that insight. Appreciate it. Next, we will have Salam Al-Mariyati, who is the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Salam, I know you deal with a lot in the Muslim community, obviously politically, and part of this is politically motivated, but we would love to hear your thoughts on the entire situation.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this very important, critical forum. And I'm really honored to be on a panel with such luminaries, and really appreciate the Indian American Muslim Council for gathering us on this very critical discussion. I think the first point I want to build on what you just said, Husna, is that we see this problem on so many cases, whether you're dealing with Palestine, or they're dealing with India, Kashmir, the Uyghurs, is we feel that the other side has organized other Americans, and Jews and Christians in particular, and we end up just talking to ourselves. And we need to break that barrier. We need to change the paradigm. It's important that we're talking together today, of course, to collect our thoughts, to come up with a strategy, to learn from each other. But the majority of our activity really should be out there, not in here. The majority of our activity is going to churches and synagogues and temples and chambers of commerce and city halls to give the talking points that we think are important, and to review those talking points. So engaging with the larger society is so important. And of course, in Islam, the idea of engagement is a common theme throughout the Quran. It says, repel evil with good, so that the one with whom there is enmity becomes as if he is your closest and warmest friend. So this kind of engagement from the Quran is telling us to go out there and start converting hearts and minds, because that's what this is all about. The second point then is that there's a global problem of religious extremism, whether we're talking about Hindutva or we're talking about what's happening in Palestine against the Israeli extremists and Jewish nationalists there, and all the problems that we see using Judaism to oppress Palestinians. Or even in our case, what we're seeing, as you said, we see some Muslims taking the name of our religion and committing atrocities against others, or even against our own, and saying that this is true Islam and the rest of us are apostates, and so on and so forth. This problem of extremism is a global phenomenon. And here in America, of course, what we're seeing in terms of white Christian white nationalism, we need to gather all of our religious groups and talk about this problem, how it's impacting India, a major and important country for the United States in terms of foreign relations. Obviously an important issue here as we're dealing with domestic issues as well, but to gather forums on how to tackle extremism. And definitely Hindutva, I would say at this point, is at the front of the line in terms of the worst forms of religious extremism, and that is also distorting Indian democracy, that is changing the heritage of India as a great country that has had Islam and Muslims as a major contributor to India's success and India's legacy. And they're trying to rip that out of history. And they're going to do that in history books very soon after they feel they've created some political momentum. Which leads me to my third point. And that is that what we're seeing is a very common playbook. It is used by Israel, it's used by India, and it is also used by China. And that is, you stigmatize Muslims as a terrorist problem, therefore justifying human rights atrocities against the population and trying to win favors from the United States government. Unfortunately, that counterterrorism playbook started here. It is part of our national security policy. And we as Americans, not just as Muslims, but all Americans should be concerned. And this is also an opportunity for us to gather all Americans to say, this national security policy now is hurting America. This national security policy is actually creating anti-Americanism. When Israel does that to the Palestinians, and now India is doing that to its Muslim population, that is created in the name of US counterterrorism policy. That is hurting America. And we need to have a conversation with the White House, with the State Department, with the Congress on how this counterterrorism strategy is being used by others now to create anti-American sentiment. And that should be really the concern of national security policy, is to deter, to mitigate anti-American sentiment. It's actually creating more anti-American sentiment by these countries using the counterterrorism playbook. And obviously China is doing the same thing, but on that case, the United States is opposing China, whereas it's either silent on India and actually complicit when it comes to Israel. So the national security strategy is something that we have to look at. And also on a domestic component of that issue, that is why there are watch lists comprising the majority of Muslims that CARE is fighting in the courts, up to 2 million, I understand. That is why there's harassment of Muslims at airports. That is why when a Muslim gets a US government job, it takes that Muslim longer to get a security clearance. That is why now there is banking discrimination against Muslims. All that is rooted in our national security policy. And so when the government says we're fighting Islamophobia, no, you're not. You're actually have caused a lot of that. It is systemic within our government. So we have to have a conversation about that with our government officials, starting with our own members of Congress, if not our own city local officials, saying, look, this strategy, this policy is creating anti-Muslim animus. And then people go and say, we're going to have a travel ban. Trump said we're having a travel ban. Why? He says, because it's part of our national security strategy. And thank God for Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who called out Trump and his people at that time, said that is a very flawed national security strategy. So we need to get into the game of this policy discourse because it is hurting us. We are the number one party in terms of its consequences against us, and we're number one in terms of how we can change it to actually benefit all Americans and make Americans more secure, because this national security strategy, obviously, where we're paying $1 trillion a year with the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the CIA, the FBI, the National Counterterrorism Center, the National Security Council, the National Security Agency, and so on and so forth. We're paying over $1 trillion a year to make America secure, is making us less secure. So we have a vested interest and can be drivers in that kind of conversation to start changing that policy. But we have to engage, which is the main message, which I believe Islam tells us that we, unless we change what is within ourselves, then don't expect to have change out there. We have to change ourselves to create change in the larger environment. So I appreciate this opportunity. Look forward to working with the Indian American Muslim Council on this issue, along with CARE and Dr. Bezian and all the, and Todd, with Interfaith America, to come up with a comprehensive strategy to bring more parties to this conversation, because it is so important obviously for Muslims in the Indian subcontinent, but also for the world and for United States in terms of having some credibility on the issue of human rights and changing policy for the betterment of all people. Thank you.
Thank you, Salam. I think it's very interesting that we are asking a government who created this playbook to stand up for this playbook playing out in another country. So I think that's a great point that you made. And also you talked about how they're trying to erase Muslims out of Indian history, out of textbooks. That's already started happening in certain Indian states. And any Muslim teachers who talk about Islam, or even just for being Muslim teachers in the education system, they're being discriminated against. There was a 7-year-old student just last month, I believe, and his teacher told every single student in his class to slap him. And they did, solely because he's Muslim. So the attacks are not just, they're basically in every sector, and they don't discriminate based on age or gender or whatever. It's all about religion. So, it's our job.
Yeah, can I just add one point to what you said earlier? I agree that it's very difficult to go to a government that is the source of the problem to say, you need to be part of the solution. Therefore, the only way it can change is like the civil rights movement, like the anti-war movement, like so many other movements that succeeded in America. It's got to start with people. It needs to be a people's movement. So the movement for the rights of Indian Muslims needs to be an American people's movement. And that is how we need to frame the conversation. And that will then force some US officials to start thinking about what needs to be changed. And this is multi-generational. This is not going to be resolved. We have to be committed in the long term. We may not see the results in our own lifetime, but planting the seeds now will be important 20 years down the line or 40 years down the line. Like Prophet Abraham, peace and blessings, peace be upon him, when he built the Kaaba, the Ummah was 3. It was himself, his son, and his wife, which and maybe a few others. Now it's 2 million, 3 million a year coming to the Kaaba. That's the long-term vision we need to have on the issue of human rights in India.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. It's not a short fight; it's a long fight. But we have to do our best in whatever, and it obviously comes down to the root of it. Thank you, Salam. I really appreciate it. We will close today's program by calling on John Prabhudas. He is the chairman of the Federation of Indian American Churches of North America. John is doing great work in DC, and obviously he is a representative for Christians. And we talked about a little earlier how Christians were targeted in terms of like partnering with the Hindutva groups, because again, a lot of them don't know better. A lot of them don't know the truth. So John, just wanted to hear from you as a Christian leader, also as someone who is doing this work day in and day out, about what we just witnessed here today. John, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. Sorry for the late arrival. I was just listening in briefly. What I would like to say is this. I mean, the Hindutva organizations in the US have learned the trick. They know what works, what doesn't. But muddling the issue with other problems in other parts of the world is not going to do any good in the Indian context. If it is, let's say, whether it's a Palestinian issue or Pakistan or even for that matter, Myanmar issues, when we bring in different angles to it, it's going to hurt the cause more than it will help. So that's kind of a caution that we always, because as a Christian organization, I get seriously questioned for working with Muslim groups, because I don't believe all Muslim groups are for lack of better words, extremists. But there is a perception, and the perception is a reality. And when we talk about Palestinian issue or issues in Myanmar, it makes our position tenable. And for the last 4 or 5 days, I've been inundated by what's happening in Armenia, asking us to speak up on the issue. But we purposefully stay away from those issues because that will only muddle the problem. Having said that, just quickly, because we are already over the time limit, I just wanted to quickly mention that the Indian diaspora in the Indian current regime in India has a policy of using the diaspora in the US to advance their agenda domestically. And with the amount of money that they have at disposal to literally buy the governments around the world. I mean, can you imagine a country like the US giving a red carpet welcome to a person like Mr. Modi, but then he turns around, goes to Egypt and gets the highest civilian award, and goes to Saudi Arabia and he gets the highest civilian award and he gets a kiss. Now, so if you want to talk about hypocrisy, this is all around. There is no lack of it. What we should be focusing on how the Hindu nationalists are hijacking the US policies and how it's going to impact India. I mean, yesterday you had raids in India of a dozen or so journalists and media houses. There's not much of a discussion in Washington. Why? Because there is a protection. The lobby groups are working overtime, and as you have seen that video, which Hasna had sent me, shows how they operate, and they know what works and what doesn't, and they use this first generation immigrants have been always like this. We bring the politics of our country of birth to this country. This has happened with the Irish. It has happened with English. It happened with every a group that has immigrated to the US. It's not peculiar to any Indian or Pakistani groups, but what is at stake now is that the American policy is again pushed. If you go to the State Department and ask them, they say, well, no, we're not making the policy. It is the White House making the policy. You go to the White House and ask them, why are you guys doing this? And they say, well, we are not in charge. The business community is in charge. And this is becoming a problem, because this same playbook played out 20 years ago with China. And now China is posing an existential threat to the U.S. interest in around the world. And what I would like to caution the U.S. Policymakers and people on the Capitol Hill and in the administration is that if we are not going to look 20, 30 years from now on how this relationship, this frenzy in quoting an extremist policy by the Indian current administration is going to impact us in the long run, I think we should not be surprised if we find ourselves in a precarious situation like that we see vis-a-vis China. But in the interest of time, I would like to just stop there. Maybe perhaps we can discuss it another time. Thank you, Asma.
Thank you so much, John, for joining us. And thank you to all of our panelists. We don't have time for a real Q&A, but I am seeing questions asking us how you can connect with our organization. The best way to connect with our organization is visiting iamc.com and clicking the Contact Us link. We would love to get connected. This fight is long, as Salam said, but it's a fight that can't be stopped, and it's a fight that we need everyone. You saw the diverse group of panelists. Everyone has different backgrounds, but we're all uniting for the same front. We're all uniting for Muslims and religious minorities around the world. So once again, thank you to our wonderful panelists for your insight. This would not have been possible without you and your hard work in preparing for this. Robert, Salam, John, Sunita, who couldn't be here, Hatem, Todd, thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great day. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.